Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something you're really interested in, Power Platform auditing.
Sounds exciting.
We'll be using excerpts from an ebook on auditing Power Apps and Power Automate.
An ebook. That's cool.
It's like our treasure map for this journey. We're going to uncover those hidden risks and security checks, and even see how some people are rocking it in the real world with their Power Platform solutions. So, you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's set sail.
Okay, first things first. Let's talk about those potential risks lurking in these Power Platform solutions. It's like setting sail without checking for those hidden reefs, right?
Yeah, you really don't want to do that. Understanding the potential risks, that's our compass here.
Okay, I like that analogy. So what kind of risks are we talking about?
Well, we can break them down into a few categories.
Mm-hmm.
Security, compliance, operational, integration, and then data management risks.
Okay, that makes sense. But can you give me like a real world example? Let's say a security risk, something that might actually happen to someone using Power Apps.
Sure, imagine you've built this amazing expense reporting app,
Okay, sounds useful.
but you accidentally gave everyone full access to edit everyone else's reports.
Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good.
No, not at all. That's a security risk right there, coming from poorly configured access controls. Someone could mess with the data, maybe even steal some sensitive information.
Yikes, that's definitely something you want to avoid. So besides accidentally giving everyone full access, what are some other security risks we should be watching out for?
Right, so there's data leakage.
Yeah.
That's where sensitive information gets exposed.
Okay, and how does that happen?
It could be in a report, or maybe through an insecure connection. And then you've got those scary sounding things like cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
They exploit those vulnerabilities to potentially compromise the whole system.
So, like hijacking the entire ship?
Kind of, yeah. They can be pretty dangerous.
Okay, so those are some pretty serious scenarios. What about compliance? You mentioned compliance risks earlier. What are those all about?
Compliance risks. They can lead to some big consequences, like fines or even legal trouble. Think about it. You wouldn't want to be storing personal data without the right consent, would you?
Definitely not.
That's a big no-no. You'd be violating regulations like GDPR. And if you're handling health information, HIPAA compliance is a whole other world of requirements.
It sounds like compliance is a bit of a minefield.
It can be, yeah.
So we've talked about security and compliance. What about those other categories you mentioned?
Right, operational risks. They're like rough seas that can disrupt your entire journey. Think about a crucial workflow suddenly failing, or maybe an app crashing because it just wasn't optimized properly.
Oof, that would be a major headache.
Oh, definitely. These kinds of problems can bring your business to a screeching halt.
Yeah, I can see that. Anything else we should add to our risk radar?
Let's see, we've got integration risks. It's like navigating through uncharted waters.
Okay, I'm listening.
You might run into problems with outdated connectors or APIs, things like that. And if they have security holes, it's even worse.
So it's not enough to secure our own ship. We have to make sure the other ships we're interacting with are seaworthy too.
That's a great way to put it. And lastly, there's data management risks. That's like hitting a submerged rock in heat. You don't see it coming, and it can really mess things up.
Ouch.
Think data redundancy, poor storage practices, loose access controls. All those things can lead to data loss, corruption, you name it. A real nightmare for any organization.
That's a lot to keep in mind. It feels like we're setting sail into some potentially dangerous waters here. So how do we manage all these risks?
Well, the secret weapon here is a Power Platform risk assessment.
Okay, a risk assessment. Tell me more about that.
It's like having a special compass to help us navigate. It identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes those risks so we can chart a safe course. It's a systematic way to see where the dangers are and how to steer clear of them.
Okay, I get it. It's like having a treasure map of potential risks. But even with the best map, sometimes the journey can be rough, right? What about the user experience? It's not just about getting to the treasure, it's about enjoying the journey too, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about checking off those security and compliance boxes. We need to make sure everyone on board has a good experience.
Yeah, so we're not just building a secure ship, we're making sure it's comfortable and easy to sail too.
Exactly. Usability testing, that's key. Can users easily navigate the app, complete their task without getting lost? We need to think about that.
Right, and we can't forget about accessibility. We don't want to leave anyone behind just because they need a slightly different kind of ship, right?
You got it. Accessibility is essential. Our Power Apps should be usable by everyone, including people with disabilities.
So it's like making sure our ship has ramps and accessible cabins so everyone can enjoy the journey.
I like that. And don't forget about mobile accessibility. So many people use their phones and tablets these days. We need to make sure our Power Apps work seamlessly on those devices too.
Makes sense. So it's like making sure our ship has a mobile-friendly deck so everyone can access the controls from their phones.
Exactly. We're designing for a diverse crew here, so everyone feels welcome and empowered to use the app.
I like that, but how do we actually know if people are using those Power Apps and workflows effectively?
We can track their engagement. How many people are actually using the app? How often? What are they doing in there?
It's like checking the ship's log to see how often the crew is using those navigation tools.
You got it. It's not enough to just build a great ship. We need to make sure everyone knows how to sail it.
Okay, so we've built the ship, trained the crew, and now it's time for the inspection. What does that actually look like?
Think of our Power App and Power Automate auditing services as a really thorough inspection of the ship.
To make sure it's seaworthy.
Exactly. We look at everything. Compliance, efficiency, security, you name it. We even dive into the code itself to make sure everything's up to snuff.
Wow, it sounds really thorough. So what makes your auditing services stand out? Is it like having a team of expert ship inspectors?
We like to think so. What sets us apart is our big picture approach. We're not just looking at individual parts, we're looking at how they all work together. Plus, we're all certified experts in Power Platform tech, so we really know our stuff.
So you're like the ship's master mechanics.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And we don't just point out problems, we give you personalized recommendations based on your specific needs and compliance rules.
So it's like having a customized ship inspection report that tells you what needs to be fixed and how to fix it.
Exactly. We want you to sail with confidence, knowing your ship is in tip-top shape.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's dive into the world of compliance auditing. How do you guys make sure a Power App follows all those complex rules like GDPR? Is it like checking if our ship has all the necessary safety certificates?
Absolutely. Compliance auditing is critical. We dig deep into those data handling practices, making sure everything's done by the book.
Okay, so you're checking if we're handling that personal data correctly and respecting all those data rights.
You got it. We also make sure we've got those user consent mechanisms in place. It's all about protecting those data subject rights, access, rectification, deletion, the whole 9 yards.
It's like making sure we have a lifeboat and that everyone knows how to use it.
That's one way to put it. We want to ensure you're not just meeting the letter of the law, but the spirit of it too.
I like that. Now, what about other regulations? Is it just GDPR you focus on, or are there others?
Oh, we cover a whole bunch of industry standards. IPA for healthcare, PCI DSS for those credit card transactions, you name it.
So you're like a one-stop shop for all those compliance needs.
Exactly. You can sail with peace of mind, knowing your ship's compliant, ready to take on any waters.
That's reassuring. Okay, so compliance is covered. Now, what about security auditing? Is that like making sure there are no cracks in the hull and all the life jackets are in good condition?
Security auditing is like scanning for those vulnerabilities that might make you an easy target for attacks.
Okay, and how do you do that?
We use a mix of automated scans and manual reviews. We're looking for weak spots like improper data access, weak authentication, anything that could put the ship in danger.
So it's like a full security sweep to make sure there are no weak points.
Exactly. We're looking for anything that could jeopardize the safety and integrity of the whole operation.
Okay, that makes sense. So what kind of security threats are you typically seeing in Power Apps? Are we talking about pirates trying to board the ship or what?
Well, we see a lot of unauthorized access. That's where someone gets into data or systems that are off limits.
Kind of like a stowaway sneaking onto the ship.
Yeah. And then there's data leakage, where sensitive information gets out. Imagine a hole in the hull spilling valuable cargo into the ocean.
That's a scary thought. What else?
Oh, and those vulnerabilities that could let attackers manipulate data, mess up operations, even take control of the whole system. It's like a saboteur trying to hijack the ship.
Sounds like we need some serious defenses, like guards, alarms, maybe even cannons.
Definitely. We recommend a multi-layered security approach. Strong authentication, access controls, encryption, the works. Regular security checks are important too. You gotta stay vigilant.
Okay, that's all about securing the ship itself. But what about the other ships we interact with? Those external connections, how do you assess their security?
That's a great point. Those external connectors are really important for integrating with other systems, but they can be risky if they're not secure. It's like connecting to another ship, but without making sure it's safe and seaworthy.
So we're not just trusting any ship that comes along.
Definitely not. We carefully check all those connectors to see if they're following security best practices.
Okay, what are you looking for specifically?
We want to see strong authentication, encryption, All those good things that protect the data being shared between systems. It's like having a customs inspection for every ship that wants to connect.
I like that analogy. Now, I'm curious about some of the technical stuff. How do you actually detect something like hard-coded sensitive information? Is it like finding a message in a bottle?
Huh, it's a bit like that. Hard-coded sensitive information like passwords or API keys, that's a big no-no. It's like writing down all your secret codes and leaving them out in the open.
So anyone could find them and cause trouble.
Exactly. We use a mix of code analysis and security scanners to find these vulnerabilities.
So you're combing through the code, looking for those hidden secrets. What about those external connectors? How do you know if they're slowing things down? Are we talking about ships getting stuck together?
That's a great question. Those external connectors can definitely impact performance if they're not properly managed. It's like being tied to a slow-moving barge. It could really drag you down.
So how do you figure out if they're causing those slowdowns?
We keep a close eye on those API response times to see how long it takes for those external calls to go through. And we also do load testing, simulating a lot of traffic to see how the system holds up.
So it's like putting the ship through a stress test to see how it performs under pressure.
Exactly. We want to make sure those connections are helping, not hindering.
Okay, we've had the ship inspected, we've spotted some potential risks, and we've talked about securing those connections. What happens next? Do we just set sail and hope for the best?
Not quite. We're here to help you fix those problems. We provide a lot of support after the audit, working with your team to address all the issues we found.
So it's not just about pointing fingers, it's about rolling up your sleeves and helping with the repairs.
That's right. We give you guidance on how to put our recommendations into action, whether that's tweaking workflows, boosting security settings, or making things run faster. We can even help with the technical parts if you need it.
So it's like having a crew of expert engineers on board to help you navigate those tricky repairs.
Exactly. We want you to feel confident and empowered to keep your ship in top shape, even after the initial inspection.
That's great. But is there a way to avoid those problems in the first place? Like, how do we prevent those leaks and cracks from happening?
Good question. We believe in being proactive. It's about setting up processes to prevent those issues from popping up again. Think of it like regular maintenance checks and safety drills to avoid those accidents before they happen.
So it's about preventing fires rather than just putting them out.
Exactly. We'll work with you to set up continuous monitoring so you can catch those problems early and establish a regular schedule for those checkups.
Like having a regular schedule for checking those systems, tightening any loose bolts, and making sure everything's in tip-top shape.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
We can also help you put in place a structured change management process. That way, any modifications to your app get reviewed and approved before they go live.
It's like having a captain who approves any changes to the ship's design or course.
You got it. We want to help you build a secure, efficient, and compliant ship that's ready for the long haul.
Okay, so for someone who's ready to embark on this auditing journey, where do they even begin? What are the first steps?
It all starts with a conversation. We'll have a chat about your specific needs and what you're hoping to achieve.
So it's like charting a course and setting a destination before we set sail.
Precisely. We'll talk about the scope of your power apps, your goals, any regulations you need to follow, all that good stuff.
So it's like creating a detailed itinerary for our auditing adventure.
That's a great way to put it. Once we've got all that figured out, we'll give you a proposal that lays out exactly what the audit will cover, how long it will take, what you'll get at the end, and how much it will cost.
Okay. Sounds pretty straightforward.
It is. And once you give us the green light, we'll dive right in and start assessing your Power Platform environment, looking at security, compliance, and efficiency.
So it's like setting sail and starting our exploration of those Power Platform seas.
Exactly. We're your guides, here to help you navigate those waters and make sure your ship is ready to face any challenges that come your way.
I like the sound of that. Now, let's talk a bit more about those specific components you focus on during these audits. What are you really looking for when you're inspecting those Power Platform applications?
When we audit a Power Platform application, we're looking at several key things. Security is always top of mind. We're checking user roles, permissions, security settings, making sure no one has more access than they should.
So it's like making sure only authorized personnel have access to the ship's bridge.
Exactly. We're preventing those stowaways from getting into sensitive areas. Data security is another big one. We check if the data flows are encrypted, if connections are secure, and if that sensitive information is being stored safely.
So it's like making sure the cargo holds are locked and that valuable stuff is kept safe.
Precisely. We also want to make sure everything's in line with regulations. Think GDPR, EHPA, PCI DSS, and all those.
So you're making sure our ship meets all the safety standards and has those permits to sail in certain waters.
That's right. But it's not just about security and compliance. We also do a performance evaluation, looking at how quickly the app loads and checking if those Power Automate flows have any unnecessary steps.
So we're checking if the ship's engine is running smoothly and if there are any inefficiencies in our routes.
Exactly. We want to make sure things are running at optimal speed.
It's about finding the most efficient route to our destination.
You got it. We also dive into the app's logic, looking at those formulas and conditions, and checking if errors are handled properly.
So it's like making sure our ship has backup navigation systems and emergency protocols.
Exactly. We need to be prepared for those unexpected storms. Data integrity is crucial too. We're making sure the data is accurate and consistent throughout the app or workflow.
So it's like making sure the cargo is labeled correctly and organized so nothing gets lost or damaged in transit.
That's a great analogy. And at the end of it all, we document all our findings and recommendations in a comprehensive report.
So it's like a detailed inspection report that outlines all the findings, recommendations, and next steps.
Exactly. We want to give you a clear roadmap for improving your Power Platform ship and keeping it sailing smoothly for the long haul.
Okay, so you're really inspecting every nook and cranny of that ship. What are some of the most common problems you find?
One of the most frequent ones is something we touched upon earlier: hard-coded sensitive data.
Right, storing those passwords and API keys directly in the app. But why is this such a risky practice? It seems convenient.
It might seem that way, but it's like leaving the ship's keys hanging right out in the open. Anyone could grab them. It makes you incredibly vulnerable to security breaches and violates those compliance rules.
Okay, so what's the solution? Where should we be storing these sensitive credentials?
A service like Azure Key Vault is the way to go. It's designed for storing sensitive data securely.
So it's like having a captain's safe for the ship's logbook and those important charts. What are some other common vulnerabilities?
Inadequate user access controls are a big one.
And that means?
It's like giving everyone on the ship access to the captain's quarters. You don't want that. Users should only have access to what they need. Otherwise, it's a recipe for disaster.
So it's about having different levels of clearance, like different security badges for different crew members.
Exactly. Another common problem is weak authentication. It's like having a flimsy lock on the door. Anyone could break in.
And I'm guessing multi-factor authentication is the solution here.
You got it. Think of it as a second lock on the door, requiring that special key. It makes it much tougher for those unauthorized folks to get in.
So it's like having a double-check system to verify everyone's identity?
That's it. And then we've got those insecure external connections. We talked about this earlier.
Right, those other ships that might not be so trustworthy.
Yeah, it's crucial to make sure those connections are secure too, or they could introduce a whole host of problems.
Okay, and how do you make sure they're secure?
Well, we scrutinize those external connectors, making sure they meet our strict security standards. We're checking for strong authentication, encryption, the works.
So it's like having a security check for every ship that wants to dock with ours.
Exactly. We can't be too careful when it comes to protecting our precious cargo.
That makes sense. Now, what about keeping track of everything that's happening within the app? How important is logging and monitoring?
Incredibly important. It's like having a ship's logbook that records everything: who came on board, what they did, when they left.
Okay, so it's about having that historical record of all the activity.
Exactly. It's crucial for detecting any suspicious activity, responding to incidents, and proving you're following the rules.
So it's about accountability and transparency, like having those security cameras that record everything happening on the ship. Now, let's switch gears and talk about the efficiency of those Power Automate flows. Are we making sure our ship is sailing at optimal speed?
That's precisely it. We want to ensure your flows are running as smoothly and efficiently as possible. We look at things like how quickly they execute, their success rate, and how many resources they're using.
So you're measuring how fast the ship is moving, how often it reaches its destination, and how much fuel it's burning along the way.
That's a great way to put it. We want to make sure those flows are getting things done quickly and efficiently without wasting time or resources.
What are some of the things that can slow down those flows?
Sometimes they're just not designed very well. Maybe there are unnecessary steps, or they're looping around when they don't need to. Maybe the data connections are slow. It's like having a ship with a clunky engine or a faulty navigation system that keeps sending it in circles.
So it's about optimizing the engine, streamlining the hull design, and finding the most efficient routes.
You got it. We help organizations find those bottlenecks and smooth them out, making those flows run much faster and more efficiently.
That makes sense. You mentioned earlier that Power Automate has some built-in features that can help with efficiency. Can you give me some examples?
Oh, there's some great ones. We use things like parallel branching, conditional actions, and optimized data retrieval techniques to really make those flows hum.
So it's like having a ship with multiple sails, a skilled navigator, and a streamlined hull design, everything working together to maximize speed and efficiency.
Exactly. We're using all the tools at our disposal to ensure those flows are working their magic.
Now let's talk about evaluating the performance of those Power Apps. How do you make sure they're quick and responsive? We don't want our ship to feel sluggish or unresponsive, right?
Precisely. We want to ensure that user experience is smooth and enjoyable. So we look at things like how quickly the app loads, how responsive it is, and how much it's stressing those system resources.
So you're measuring how quickly the ship sets sail, how smoothly it responds to the helm, and how much strain it's putting on the engine.
That's a great analogy. We don't want any lag or delays.
What are some of the things that can cause those slowdowns?
Well, sometimes those apps are just overloaded with heavy images, complex logic, or inefficient data queries. It's like having a ship with too much cargo, a complicated navigation system, or a crew that's not working together very well.
So you're looking for ways to lighten the load, streamline those processes, and improve communication.
Exactly. We help organizations optimize their apps to make them feel faster, more responsive, and less demanding on resources.
So it's all about making that ship sail smoothly and efficiently. Now, what about keeping track of how much fuel our ship is using? How do you assess the usage of resources like CPU, memory, and storage?
Resource management is crucial. We analyze how your solutions are using those valuable resources. We look for any signs of waste or inefficiency, things like CPU spikes, memory leaks, excessive storage usage, or too many API calls.
It's like making sure we're not running the engine at full throttle when we don't need to, or overloading the cargo hold with unnecessary supplies.
Precisely. We want to make sure those resources are used efficiently and effectively. And just like a ship needs regular maintenance to keep running smoothly, we encourage organizations to keep a close eye on their Power Platform solutions with continuous monitoring.
Okay, so we're checking those gauges and instruments to make sure everything's functioning properly and we're not springing any leaks.
Exactly. By analyzing those usage patterns and optimizing where we can help you avoid any unexpected costs or system crashes down the line. It's all about smooth sailing. By analyzing those usage patterns and optimizing where we can help you avoid any unexpected costs or system crashes down the line. It's all about smooth sailing.
Smooth sailing, I like that. But what are some specific tools or techniques you recommend for this kind of monitoring? I mean, are we just staring at dashboards all day?
Oh, no, not at all. Power Platform actually has some really cool built-in tools for this.
Oh, like what?
Well, you've got Power BI, and then there's Power Apps Analytics. They give you this real-time view into how those apps are performing and what those users are up to.
Okay, so we can see if people are actually using the apps and if they're running into any problems.
Exactly. It's like having a detailed map of your ship's journey, showing the route, the speed, even the weather conditions. You can spot those bottlenecks and see where you can improve things.
I like that analogy. So it's like a captain's log that helps you make smarter decisions about your Power Platform fleet.
That's a great way to put it. Now let's talk about something that everyone loves: keeping those costs under control.
Ah, yes, licensing costs. Nobody likes talking about those, but they're important.
Oh, they definitely are.
Yeah.
It's like making sure you're not overpaying for your crew or cargo space.
So how do we keep those costs in check?
One key thing is making sure you've got the right kind of license for each user.
Okay, so not everyone needs a first-class ticket to sail the Power Platform seas.
Exactly. Power Platform has different licenses, each with its own set of features. By taking a look at what people actually need and how they're using the platform, we can recommend the most cost-effective option.
So it's like making sure we're not paying for empty cabins or lifeboats that no one's using. What else should we be watching out for?
We also focus on resource consumption. Things like API calls, storage, all those services that can really rack up the costs.
Okay, so it's about keeping an eye on our fuel consumption and cargo space, making sure we're not being wasteful.
Exactly. We might recommend optimizing some workflows, reducing API calls, storing data more efficiently, or even scheduling certain actions for off-peak hours to avoid those higher rates.
It's like adjusting our sailing route to avoid those strong currents or doing those repairs during the off-season when it's cheaper.
That's a great way to think about it. We also take a look at those premium features and add-ons to make sure they're actually being used and providing value.
So it's like checking the cargo hold for anything we don't need anymore, or making sure we're not overstocked on supplies.
Exactly. We might suggest switching to a standard connector, finding a different solution, or even canceling those licenses that are just gathering dust.
So it's all about making sure we're getting the most bang for our buck and not wasting money on things we don't need.
Precisely. And of course, we always check for those unused or inactive licenses. You'd be surprised how often we find those.
It's like discovering you've been paying for phantom passengers who never even boarded the ship.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
By looking at all these different areas, we can help you optimize your Power Platform spending and make sure those dollars are working hard for you. Now, let's talk about something that's often overlooked: consolidating those resources.
Okay, so we've optimized our crew and supplies. Now, how do we make the ship itself more efficient?
One of the first things we look at is unifying those data sources.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of organizations have their data spread out across different systems. It's like having different compartments on the ship that aren't properly connected.
So it's about bringing all that data together in a central location, like a well-organized cargo hold where everything's easy to find.
Exactly. It simplifies things, reduces complexity, and can often lead to lower licensing costs.
Okay, so that's about streamlining the data. What about those redundant apps and flows we talked about earlier?
That's another area ripe for consolidation.
Oh, so?
We often see organizations with multiple apps or flows doing very similar things.
Like having duplicate navigation systems, that's just confusing.
Exactly. It's a waste of resources, and it makes things harder to manage. Merging those redundancies makes the whole environment simpler and easier to use.
So it's like having one clear and efficient navigation system that everyone can use. Makes sense. Now, what about managing all the different roles and permissions?
Simplifying those user roles and permissions is crucial. If you've got too many roles, it gets complicated.
Like having a confusing chain of command where no one knows who's responsible for what.
Exactly. Consolidating those roles makes administration easier and improves security by reducing the risk of people accessing things they shouldn't.
Okay, so it's like having a clear organizational structure so everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Precisely. And finally, we encourage centralizing app management whenever possible.
What does that mean?
Instead of having those apps and flows spread out all over the place, it's about bringing them together under one roof, so to speak.
So it's like having one central command center to manage our entire Power Platform fleet.
That's a great analogy. It makes things much easier to manage and control.
Okay, so we've talked about optimizing individual ships, but how do we know if the whole fleet is profitable? How do we measure the cost effectiveness of these Power Platform solutions?
That's a great question. Measuring cost effectiveness is crucial. It's about making sure we're not just spending money, but investing wisely.
So we're not just throwing those dollars overboard, we're making sure they're bringing in a good return.
Exactly. We look at things like cost savings, efficiency gains, how quickly those solutions start delivering value, user adoption rates, all those good indicators.
Okay, let's break that down. How do you actually measure cost savings and efficiency?
Well, we dig deep into the numbers and see how those solutions are impacting the bottom line. Are they automating manual tasks, reducing errors, simplifying processes?
Okay, so we're quantifying those improvements and showing how much money the organization is saving. What about those efficiency gains?
For efficiency, we look at things like how much faster processes are running, how much more accurate the data is, and if people are getting more done in less time.
So it's like measuring how much faster our ship is sailing, how much more cargo we can carry, and how efficient our crew is. It's all about optimization. What was that time to value thing you mentioned earlier?
Yes, that's all about how quickly those solutions start making a difference.
The faster, the better.
Exactly. We want to see those benefits kicking in as soon as possible.
It's like wanting that ship to reach its destination and unload that cargo quickly so we can start generating revenue. Now, what about making sure people are actually using those apps and workflows? How do you measure user adoption and engagement?
User adoption is super important. It's like seeing if people are actually enjoying those amenities on our ship. We want to make sure they're not just sitting there unused.
So we're looking for signs that people are actually using those apps and finding them helpful.
Exactly. We look at how many people are using those apps, how often they're using them, and what they have to say about their experience. If we see high adoption rates and positive feedback, we know those solutions are hitting the mark.
It's like getting those rave reviews from happy passengers who can't wait to sail with us again. What about customer satisfaction? How do those Power Platform solutions affect the customer experience?
That's a crucial one. We want to see if those solutions are making customers happier.
So are they getting their packages delivered faster? Are they having fewer problems?
Exactly. Happy customers are loyal customers. We look for measurable improvements in customer satisfaction. Fewer complaints, better reviews, all those good signs.
It's all about providing a smooth and enjoyable experience so those customers keep coming back for more.
Precisely. By focusing on these tangible benefits, we can really show the value of those Power Platform solutions and prove that it's a worthwhile investment. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that can be a bit tricky: auditing those integrations between Power Platform and other systems.
Okay, so we're talking about those connections between our ship and other vessels or ports. What should we be looking for when we're inspecting those integration points?
Integrations can be complex, so we want to make sure those connections are secure, reliable, and efficient.
Okay, so what are the key areas you focus on?
We always start with the data itself. We want to make sure the data is flowing correctly between those systems and that nothing gets lost or corrupted along the way.
So it's like making sure that cargo is being loaded and unloaded properly.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And then there's the security aspect. We look at those permissions and access controls for those integrations, making sure only the authorized folks and systems have access to that data.
So it's like having those security checks at the dock to prevent any unauthorized access or smuggling.
Exactly. And we always check to see if there's proper monitoring and logging in place. We want to know what's happening with those integrations and be able to spot any problems quickly.
So it's like having that communication log that records all the messages being sent between our ship and those other vessels.
Precisely. And of course, we always review the documentation. We want to make sure it's clear, accurate, and up to date.
So it's like having a comprehensive manual that explains how to operate those docking mechanisms safely and how to troubleshoot any problems that might arise.
You got it. Now let's zoom in on a specific part of integration security: auditing, power automate, connection security. It's like checking those cables and connectors that link our ship to other vessels, making sure they're secure and not going to snap.
Okay, so we're focusing on those connections that let Power Automate talk to those external systems.
That's right. First and foremost, we want to make sure those connections are secure using strong authentication and that those sensitive credentials are stored safely.
So it's like making sure those connectors have tamper-proof seals and those access codes are locked away in a safe.
Precisely. We also look at those permissions, making sure those connections can only access what they need.
So it's like giving visitors a limited access key card. They can only go to certain areas of the ship.
Exactly. And we always carefully check the security of those external connectors. We want to make sure they're not bringing any vulnerabilities on board.
So we're inspecting those other vessels before we connect with them, making sure they meet our safety standards.
That's a great way to put it. Now, even with the best security measures, things can still go wrong. That's where error handling comes in.
Okay, so what happens when there's a problem? Do those integrations just crash and burn?
We hope not. That's why robust error handling is so important. It's like having those backup systems and emergency protocols in case something goes wrong.
So if one system goes down, the whole integration doesn't fall apart.
Exactly. We want those integrations to be resilient and able to handle those unexpected events gracefully. We also make sure those errors are logged properly.
So it's like having a black box recorder that captures all the details so we can figure out what went wrong.
Exactly. And we make sure someone gets notified when those errors happen.
So it's like having an alarm system that alerts the crew when there's a fire or a leak.
You got it. We want to be able to respond quickly to minimize any damage or downtime.
So it's all about having a well-prepared ship and a vigilant crew ready to tackle any challenges. Now, shifting gears a bit, we've talked about security and connections, but what about those rules and regulations that guide our journey? That's where governance comes in, right?
Absolutely. Governance is like having a set of maritime laws that helps us stay on course and ensures we're sailing safely and responsibly.
So we're not just wandering aimlessly through the Power Platform seas. We've got a plan, and we're following the rules.
Precisely. During an audit, we take a close look at various governance policies, like data governance, change management, audit and compliance, and security.
Okay, let's break that down. What's involved in data governance? It's like having rules about the cargo we're carrying, right?
Exactly. Data governance is all about making sure that data is handled responsibly. We look at who owns the data, how it's protected, and how long it's kept.
So it's about knowing who's in charge of what and making sure they're following the rules.
You got it. We want to make sure that sensitive data is locked down tight and that we're following the right procedures for storing and disposing of that data.
Okay, so that's data governance. What about change management?
Change management is like having a system for making modifications to our ship. We don't want to just start drilling holes in the hull without a plan.
So it's about having a structured process for making those changes.
Exactly. We want to make sure those changes are reviewed, approved, and implemented properly to minimize any risks or disruptions.
It's like having a captain who signs off on all those modifications to the ship's design. Now, what about those audit and compliance policies? They're like those regular inspections we need to pass to make sure our ship is seaworthy, right?
Absolutely. Those policies make sure we're following all the rules and regulations, we're checking audit trails, verifying compliance with industry standards, all those important things.
So it's like having those safety inspections and certifications to prove that our ship is fit to sail.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And finally, we can't forget about security governance. It's like having a security plan to protect our ship from pirates, storms, and all those other dangers out there.
So we're being proactive and not just relying on luck to keep our ship safe.
Exactly. A strong security governance policy covers everything from access controls and authentication to external user access and those all-important audit logs.
It's like having a multi-layered security system with guards, alarms, and maybe even a few cannons. Now, let's talk about how we manage those shipyards and ports. What's involved in environment management?
Environment management is all about making sure those power platform environments are structured correctly and that they support those security, compliance, and efficiency goals.
Okay, so what are we looking at here?
We review everything from your environment strategy and those lifecycle management processes to how permissions and access controls are set up and how you're managing your resources and costs.
Okay, so it's like making sure the shipyard is well organized and secure.
Precisely. First things first, we look at the overall environment strategy.
What does that entail?
Well, we want to make sure those environments are properly segmented based on their purpose and the sensitivity of the data they hold.
So it's like having different docks for different types of ships, cargo ships over there, passenger liners over here.
That's a great analogy. It's about preventing any cross-contamination or security breaches. We also want to make sure there are different environments for development, testing, and production. Just like a shipyard has separate areas for building, repairing, and launching those ships.
Okay, so it's about keeping things organized and making sure those development activities don't interfere with the live production systems.
Exactly. And then we look at environment lifecycle management.
What does that involve?
It's like having a system for decommissioning those old ships that are no longer seaworthy.
So it's about keeping the shipyard clean and efficient.
Precisely. Those outdated environments can pose security risks and waste resources, so we want to make sure they're retired properly. And of course, we review those permissions and access controls within each environment.
Okay, so it's like making sure only authorized personnel can access certain areas of the shipyard?
That's the idea. We want to prevent any unauthorized snooping around or tampering with sensitive systems. And finally, we look at those resource and cost management practices.
So are we being energy efficient? Are we managing our waste properly?
Exactly. It's all about being responsible and making sure we're using those resources wisely.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with governance, but let's dive deeper into access control. We want to make sure we've got a strong security system in place, right?
Absolutely. Access control is paramount. We need to make sure the right people can access the right resources while keeping those unauthorized folks out.
So it's like having a multi-layered security system with key cards, fingerprint scanners, and security guards to protect our ship.
That's a great analogy. We focus on things like role-based access control, making sure authentication and authorization are strong, managing those external users, and keeping a close eye on those audit logs.
Okay, let's start with role-based access control. It's like having different levels of clearance for different crew members.
Exactly. We want to make sure access is granted based on those clearly defined roles and responsibilities.
So the captain can access everything, the navigator can access those navigation systems, but the engineer can't just wander into the captain's quarters.
That's the idea. It's called the principle of least privilege, and it's a cornerstone of good security.
What about verifying those identities? How do you make sure people are who they say they are?
Well, that's where authentication and authorization come in. We make sure those passwords are strong and that multi-factor authentication is enabled wherever possible.
So it's like having a double-check system, requiring a passport and a boarding pass to get onto the ship.
That's a great way to put it. MFA adds that extra layer of security. Now, what about those visitors or guests? How do we handle those? External users are a bit different, as they might not be subject to all the same security policies and training as our internal folks.
So it's like having a designated area for visitors where they need to go through a more thorough security screening.
Exactly. We need to be extra careful with those external users, making sure they only have access to what they absolutely need.
And I'm guessing audit logs are important for keeping track of everyone's activity.
Absolutely. It's like having a security camera system that records everything that happens on board. We want to know who did what, when they did it, and what systems they accessed.
So it's all about accountability and transparency.
Exactly. Now let's talk about wrapping up our inspection and delivering the report. It's like presenting a detailed report to the captain, highlighting our findings and giving them a plan for improvement.
Okay, so we've done our inspection, we've gathered all the data, and now it's time to put together that report. What are the key elements of a good audit report?
A well-structured audit report is essential. We start with an executive summary that's a high-level overview for those who need the key takeaways quickly.
So it's like the too long didn't read version for busy folks.
Exactly. Then we dive into the details, providing a comprehensive analysis of all the findings, breaking down those security vulnerabilities, compliance issues, performance bottlenecks, everything we uncovered.
So it's the deep dive for those who need all the nitty-gritty detail.
Precisely. Then we lay out our recommendations, clear, actionable steps the organization can take to address those issues.
It's like giving them a to-do list for repairs and upgrades.
That's a good way to put it. We want to make sure our recommendations are as practical and helpful as possible. We also include a risk assessment, so the organization understands the potential consequences of those issues if they're not addressed.
So it's like assessing the likelihood of a storm or the potential damage of a collision, helping them prioritize those repairs.
Exactly. And we always end with a clear conclusion and a set of next steps, outlining a plan for moving forward.
So it's like charting a course for the future.
Precisely. We want to give them a roadmap for improvement and ongoing maintenance.
Okay, so the report is delivered. What about documenting all those connections and dependencies? It's like having a detailed map of how everything's connected within our ship systems.
Documentation is crucial. It's like having those blueprints and wiring diagrams so we understand how everything works together.
Okay, so why is this so important?
Imagine trying to troubleshoot a problem without knowing how the systems are connected. It'd be a nightmare.
So it's about having that clear understanding of how everything fits together. What are some best practices for creating this documentation?
Well, there are 3 key areas we focus on. Mapping those dependencies, creating a clear overview of those connections, and then analyzing the impact of any changes.
Okay, let's start with those dependencies. What's involved in mapping them?
Dependency mapping is like creating an inventory of all the different parts of the app and how they rely on each other. We're talking data sources, services, connectors, external systems, everything.
So if we change one part, we know what other parts might be affected. It's like knowing that if we replace the ship's engine, we might also need to upgrade the propeller.
Exactly. It helps us avoid those unintended consequences. We also document those connections, providing a clear picture of how the app talks to those other systems.
So it's like having a record of our communications with other ships and ports.
Precisely. We need to know what kind of connection it is, how it's configured, and what security measures are in place. And then whenever we're making changes to the app, we always do a change impact analysis.
Okay, so we're thinking ahead and trying to anticipate any potential problems.
Exactly. By documenting all these things, we can make those upgrades and modifications much smoother.
Okay, so we've inspected the ship, identified those issues, and documented everything. Now it's time for the actual repairs, right? What are some of the common problems you find during these audits?
We find a wide range of issues, everything from small cracks in the hull to those major engine problems. We categorize those issues based on their severity and then recommend the best way to fix them.
Okay, let's start with those security vulnerabilities. What are some of the most common ones you see?
Security vulnerabilities are always top of mind. We see a lot of weak access controls, data that's not handled securely, and weak authentication mechanisms.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster. How do you recommend tackling these problems?
Well, multi-factor authentication is a must-have. It's like having that double lock system on all the doors. We also review those access control policies, making sure no one has more access than they need.
So it's like having those different security clearances for different club members.
Exactly. And of course, encrypting that sensitive data is crucial.
Okay, so we're locking down those sensitive systems and making sure the data is protected. What about those weak credentials?
We always recommend storing those sensitive credentials in a secure vault like Azure Key Vault. It's a much safer alternative to hard coding them into the application.
So it's like having a high security vault for those important secrets. What about compliance? What happens if we're not following the rules?
Compliance issues are nothing to mess with. We often see organizations struggling to meet the requirements of regulations like GDPR or IPEA.
It's like sailing without those permits or having outdated safety equipment.
Exactly. To fix those compliance gaps, we often recommend reviewing those data storage and handling policies, implementing data retention policies, and making sure we've got those audit trails in place.
Okay, so we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. Now, what about those performance issues? How do we make sure our ship is sailing at top speed?
Performance is key. We often find workflows that are poorly designed or apps that are slow to load.
It's like having barnacles on the hull or a sputtering engine.
Exactly. We analyze those workflows and applications, looking for ways to make them run more efficiently.
Okay, so what are some of the things you do to optimize performance?
For Power Automate flows, we might recommend simplifying the logic, streamlining those connections, or adjusting the triggers.
So we're optimizing the engine and getting rid of any unnecessary weight.
Precisely. And for Power Apps, we might suggest simplifying the user interface, optimizing data queries, or using caching mechanisms to make things snappier.
Okay, that's making those apps feel more responsive.
No, got it. And we also often find organizations with a lot of redundant resources.
So it's like having a ship with duplicate compartments or carrying extra cargo that we don't need.
That's a good way to put it. We recommend consolidating those apps and flows, retiring those unused environments, and making sure those resources are being used wisely.
Okay, so we've identified all these potential problems during our inspection. But with so much to fix, how do we decide what to tackle first?
Prioritizing those repairs is crucial. We use a few criteria to help organizations decide what to focus on.
Like what?
We look at the severity of the risk, the impact on the business, how much it's impacting those resources, and any regulatory deadlines we need to meet. And of course, we always encourage those quick wins.
Okay, tell me more about those quick wins. What are those?
Those are the things that can be fixed quickly and easily with minimal effort.
So we're getting those small victories to build momentum and show progress.
Exactly. It's a great way to start. Now, how do we actually go about implementing those recommendations? Well, we use a mix of automation and manual checks to make sure those repairs are done properly.
So it's like having a team of skilled mechanics with the latest tools and diagnostic equipment.
That's a great analogy. Automation helps us speed things up and improve accuracy.
So it's like having robotic arms to do those repetitive tasks.
Exactly. But even with the best automation, we still need those skilled mechanics. Those manual checks are still essential.
Okay, I'm curious. Why are those manual checks still so important?
Automated tools are great for catching those obvious problems, but they don't always understand the full picture.
So those automated tools can point you in the right direction, but it takes human expertise to really diagnose those complex issues.
Precisely. We need to verify those findings and make sure nothing slips through the cracks.
So what are some of those manual checks you do?
We manually review the app and flow designs, looking closely at how the logic works and how data is being handled. We also check those user roles and permissions, making sure everything's secure.
So you're making sure there are no gaps in those defenses.
That's right. We also review all the compliance documentation, making sure everything aligns with those regulations. And we run performance tests to see how things are running in the real world.
So you're really putting those systems through their paces.
Exactly. Now, how often should these audits be conducted? Is it like an annual checkup for our ship?
The frequency really depends on the complexity of your systems and the type of data you're handling.
Okay, so what's a good rule of thumb?
For most organizations, those security and compliance audits should be done at least every 3 months.
So it's about staying vigilant and making sure those defenses are always up to date.
Exactly. And then once a year, we recommend a comprehensive audit that covers everything. That's like taking your ship into dry dock for a complete overhaul.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens if we ignore those warning signs or put off those repairs? What are the consequences of letting those Power Platform inefficiencies linger?
Those seemingly small problems can turn into big headaches down the line, impacting your costs, your productivity, even your customer relationships.
Okay, so how do those inefficiencies affect our bottom line?
Inefficient workflows and applications, they can eat up resources. That means you're spending more on things like storage, API calls, and even licensing fees. So it's like a ship with a leaky fuel tank. Those costs just keep adding up.
That's a good analogy. And then there's the impact on user productivity. When those apps and flows are slow, unreliable, or hard to use, people get frustrated.
So it's like having those clunky tools and outdated systems that slow everyone down. What about those business processes?
When those power apps and flows aren't working properly, it can create bottlenecks in those important processes.
So it's like having a traffic jam on the shipping lanes, preventing goods and services from flowing smoothly.
Precisely. Those delays can lead to missed deadlines and unhappy customers. And then there's the risk of errors and downtime.
And I'm guessing those are never good.
Not at all. Errors can lead to all sorts of problems: bad data, inaccurate reports, even financial losses. And downtime, well, that could bring your whole operation to a halt.
So it's like those little cracks turning into major structural damage that can sink the whole ship.
It can definitely feel that way. That's why it's so important to address those issues early on and make sure your Power Platform solutions are running smoothly.
Okay, so neglecting those repairs can be costly and disruptive. But let's talk about the positive side. How do we prove those Power Platform solutions are worth the investment? How do we demonstrate that return on investment?
Demonstrating ROI is key. We want to show those tangible benefits, those improvements that make a real difference.
So it's like showing that our ship isn't just costing money, it's actually generating profit.
Exactly. We look at those cost savings, those efficiency gains, how quickly those solutions start delivering value, everything that shows those positive impacts.
Okay, let's break that down. How do you measure cost savings?
We look for those areas where the solution has automated manual tasks, reduced errors, or streamlined those processes. We quantify those savings as much as possible to show the financial impact.
So it's like showing how much fuel we've saved or how much cargo we can now carry thanks to those upgrades.
That's a great analogy. And then there are those efficiency gains.
And those are...
Well, we're looking at things like faster turnaround times, improved data accuracy, and increased productivity. We want to see how those solutions are helping people get more done in less time.
So it's like measuring how much faster our ship is sailing and how much more efficient the crew has become.
Precisely. And we also consider the time to value, how quickly those solutions start making a difference.
The faster, the better, right?
Exactly. We want to see those benefits as soon as possible.
It's like launching that new ship and seeing it quickly reach its destination, delivering that cargo and starting to generate revenue.
That's the idea. We also want to make sure people are actually using those solutions and finding them valuable.
Exactly.
We want to make sure people are actually using those solutions and finding them valuable. So we look at things like user adoption and engagement.
Okay, and how do you measure that?
Well, we track the number of active users, how often they're using those apps, and what they're saying about their experience.
So it's like those customer satisfaction surveys.
Kind of, yeah. We want to see if people are happy with the tools and finding them useful.
It's like making sure those passengers are enjoying their cruise and giving us good reviews. What about the impact on our customers? How do we know if those Power Platform solutions are making a difference for them?
That's a great question. We want to see if those solutions are leading to happier customers.
So fewer complaints, faster service, that sort of thing.
Exactly. We look for improvements in things like complaint rates, customer feedback scores, and all those metrics that tell us how we're doing.
It's like making sure those shipments arrive on time and in perfect condition. Happy customers are repeat customers.
You got it. By focusing on all these different areas, we can really show the value of those Power Platform solutions and prove that it's a smart investment.
Okay, now let's talk about something I've been wondering about. Auditing those integrations between Power Platform and other systems.
Ah, yes, integrations. They can be tricky. It's like inspecting those docking mechanisms that connect our ship to other vessels or ports.
Exactly. We want to make sure those connections are secure and reliable.
Absolutely. When we're auditing those integrations, we focus on a few key areas. First, we want to make sure that data is flowing correctly between those systems.
So it's like making sure the cargo is being transferred properly and nothing gets lost or damaged along the way. What else?
Security is paramount. We look closely at those integration permissions and access controls, making sure that only the authorized systems and users can get to that data.
So it's like having security checkpoints at those docks to prevent any unauthorized access.
Exactly. And we always check that there's proper monitoring and logging in place so you can see what's happening with those integrations and spot any problems quickly.
It's like having that communication log that records all the messages being sent back and forth between our ship and those other vessels.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And of course, we always review that integration documentation, making sure it's clear, accurate, and up to date.
So it's like having a detailed manual that explains how to operate those docking mechanisms and how to troubleshoot any issues.
That's a great analogy. Now let's zoom in on a specific part of integration security. Auditing Power Automate connection security.
Okay, so we're checking those connections that allow Power Automate to talk to external systems.
That's right. We want to make sure those connections are using strong authentication, that those credentials are stored securely, and that those permissions are set up correctly.
So it's like having tamper-proof seals on those connectors and making sure those access codes are locked away safely. What else do you look for?
Well, we always check the security of those external connectors themselves. We want to make sure they're not introducing any vulnerabilities into our system.
So it's like inspecting those other ships before we allow them to dock with ours, making sure they meet our safety standards.
Precisely. We can't be too trusting when it comes to security.
Now, even with the best security measures, things can still go wrong. What about error handling? How do you make sure those integrations can handle unexpected events?
That's a great question. Error handling is essential. It's like having a backup generator or emergency protocols in case the main power goes out.
So if one system goes down, the whole operation doesn't grind to a halt.
Exactly. We want those integrations to be resilient and able to handle those unexpected events gracefully. We also make sure that those errors are logged in detail so we can figure out what went wrong and prevent it from happening again.
It's like having that black box recorder for integrations.
Exactly. And we always make sure someone is notified when those errors occur so they can take action quickly.
Okay, so it's all about having a well-designed system that can withstand those inevitable bumps in the road. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about everything from risk assessment and security to compliance, performance, and integration auditing. It seems like Power Platform auditing is a complex and ongoing process.
It definitely is, but it's a journey worth taking. By being proactive in addressing those potential problems, you can ensure that your Power Platform solutions are secure, compliant, efficient, and delivering that business value.
So it's like having a skilled crew, a well-maintained ship, and a clear understanding of the waters we're sailing.
Exactly. Power Platform auditing is all about continuously improving and evolving so you can navigate towards success.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. We hope everyone listening has gained some valuable insights from our deep dive into the world of Power Platform auditing.
It's been a pleasure. If anyone has any questions or needs help navigating those Power Platform waters, don't hesitate to reach out. Safe sailing, everyone.
Until next time, happy developing.